Welcome to Clothing Culture. I'm Emily Lane.
I'm Brett Schnitker.
We speak with experts where we explore the global dynamics that shape trends in the fashion industry.
Brought to you by Stars Design Group, a global production and design house with over 30 years of industry experience.
Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. Today, we're going to dive into how to vet factory partners. Brett, this is a really big world, and it is one that is full of thousands of employees, actually millions of employees. We're looking at an industry that employs around 11 million people. We've got 349,000 factories approximately globally. How do you even begin to navigate finding the right factory partners?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a task, and I think people in many cases oversimplify it. They think I can go on, and this is no slack against Alibaba, but they think I can go on Alibaba, go order a piece in many cases, and no problem, things will show up. I would tell you that that's probably not the extent of sourcing as we know it. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've traveled to over 70 countries. I've been in thousands of factories, and I think there are key steps to vetting a factory properly, and I think that's always evolving. But I think there are definitely key steps. I mean, the first for me is making sure they have a skilled workforce. You'd be surprised. You'd think, a factory that has a roof over its head, a bunch of sewing machines, and, they're ready to do business means that, they just naturally have a skilled workforce. And that's not necessarily true. It varies country by country. There are certain countries that are well advanced in skilled sewing, and there are other countries that are sort of stepping into this business. Clothing manufacture, as we've talked about in previous episodes, is kind of that first step toward industrialization.
Right.
So there's this natural process to want to engage in the apparel business to begin with, and that just being what it is kind of sets you up for some challenge because a lot of these people in certain countries might be moving from an agrarian economy to an industrial step like apparel. And so those mindsets, the speed at which sewing's occurring, the amount of time and years that the sewers have been working at individual stations could vary dramatically. And I think certainly understanding the sewing workforce is important.
I would think that cultural dynamics would play a role as well, just because every culture has a different a set of values. And so having a clear understanding of those values as you're looking at, the worker, the focus of the workers and the setup of things, I imagine that you see a lot of variance there.
I think it's bigger than that. I think it's, it's even, I'm an American, so there's that term ugly American around the world. And there are these vast differences in country and culture. And I've learned over the years to be a student of culture, understanding what different societies and countries, deem polite, engaging acceptable behavior and what they deem as not so polite or not so engaging. I think it's important at all levels of this business to really understand that because these are your partners overseas. It's not just the factory manager, it's not the factory owner, it's people that are sewing in the lines, it's people in the cutting tables, all these different, there's an amazing amount of steps that go through from concept to creation and production of a garment. And all of these people are really important and integral to achieving success. So definitely being mindful of the culture is important.
You talk a lot about the people, and we mentioned earlier how this industry employs over 11 million people. Tell me about that, the human element of vetting factories. I'm thinking even beyond fair trade here. I'm thinking, just employee happiness.
Yeah, I think at its base, that is a big conversation, and I think an important note of awareness. We as Americans are pretty blessed. We have a certain level of in many of us, how we live and what we expect. And sort of setting that level of expectation across the world is probably not realistic. A lot of the countries that you go to, this job keeps a roof over someone's head. It feeds them. Mm-hmm. So as you're looking at different factories, I think gauging what that level of happiness is, it varies in a lot of cases. I think for a worker in Bangladesh, happiness is definitely receiving income and keeping the family fed. It is a repetitive and sometimes tedious task. And I think that what we're seeing in the industry is evolutions of that kind of typical worker line mentality where sewers can pick up different stations and different tasks. They're working on exercise classes. They're working on improved holistic health programs. Some of them do it for marketing, sadly. Mm-hmm. You'll step in and you can kind of see through that being in the industry for a long time. And some people are really engaging that because they realize that, long hours behind a sewing machine can lead to a lot of different issues long term. And so having the ability to honestly engage with that workforce, give them a voice, give them opportunity for exercises or, different things like that, growth for
learning
sure.
Other skill sets.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, when you sit down and you really speak to a lot of people in this industry in many countries and even at the, certainly at the sewer level, these are people with, the good ones, there are people with a lot of integrity. They really want to do a good job. They're proud of their work. And I think really, letting them know that you're aware of what they do is important, and ensuring that the factories that you're engaging with also share that desire for the worker. Mm-hmm. We've seen a lot of tragic situations happen around the world, and it comes with, greed, carelessness, etc. And the world is too small. There's too much communication and rapid communication. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, the culture overall quickly can weed out some of the worst situations that are occurring.
Are you asking questions to learn about this culture, or is this something that you're going and seeing firsthand?
Earlier in my career, I had some partners when I engaged, we'd call them agents in the industry, and they were usually people that lived in the country that help you navigate the space and apparel. Today, Stars, we have our own offices, we have our own employees, but a few years ago, maybe 30 or so, these agents would act as our emissaries. And so you could ask them a lot of questions. And when you're young in the business, we tend to ask a lot more questions, much like kids, asking all the questions all the time. And I think for me, I've always had a very strong appetite to understand culture, and I've always wanted to engage in culture. So those emissaries or agents really help me step through that. Today, I think I do a lot of reading, understanding the culture. I think being immersed in the culture, a lot of the countries I've been to, I've been there for months, if not years. So having a desire and willingness and thirst for knowledge in those cultures, I think provides a pretty good stepping stone to have some success in doing business in each one of these countries.
In addition to the human element and cultural side of things, there's actually getting inside the factory and looking at equipment and the line and so forth. Can you dive into a little bit more about the things that you're looking for when you're walking through a factory to see if this is going to be a good fit?
Sure. I think in speaking to a lot of different people, I am shocked at how few people have really traveled overseas extensively to really understand who their partners are and really understand what goes on in a factory. And that's always been very important to me. And so I've kind of set up a process of how I walk through a factory. And I think, as we've mentioned, really exploring the detail down to sewers' efficiencies, exploring stitching perfections and imperfections in the line, looking at how many defects are coming out of the line, making sure that the sewing equipment is clean, the needles are sharp, there's needle logs so needles don't get lost in actual production, that they pull those off the machine, making sure that the oil is clean on the machines. There's all these different steps that you look through in a factory. You look through how many supervisors are walking through the lines to ensure that the quality is good. If there's quality stations posted, if the actual garment that you're producing has a sample in the line, if there are spec sheets and tech packs for QC people to explore in the line. And, I'll walk through the lines. I'll take a look at the garments manufactured at various steps when I'm kind of vetting a factory. I'll sit down, I'll have conversations with sewers about, how they feel their experience has been. I'll sit down with QC people at the end of the line. I'll pull a ton of samples random, do an inspection. In our industry, there's such a thing, AQL, Associated Quality Level. It's a bunch of tables kind of built by the military. They separate things between majors and minors. Majors simply mean something that if a garment went to a customer and it's a defect strong enough to exhibit a return, that's kind of a major. And then there's minors, and those are some things that could be better, but a consumer would never really see those as a defect. And then there's an additional step, which is critical. A critical typically means like there's a needle that's stuck in a garment, especially, to be real clear, a needle stuck in a baby garment would be bad,
really
right?
bad, yeah.
So in a critical step, the entire shipment is rejected, it's resorted and re-inspected. But, there's so many things when you walk through a factory. And if a factory is fully vertical, knitting, dyeing, weaving, there's a lot more steps to explore. But in a typical, what we call CM factory, cut and make, those are some of the steps that I walk through. I will, I'll pull a bunch of samples at the end of the line, look through these defects. I'll also pull out the measurement guides. I'll run and measure a number of garments so I can see that whether or not the QC/QA is marketing or whether they're really ensuring. You can't really inspect in quality, so you've got to make sure that what's coming off the sewing line is achieving the standards that the customer has set through. But also there's this insight because some sewers can have bad days. So you want to be able to understand that.
Yeah, understanding that people have bad days. Do you assess a factory over multiple days?
I will assess a factory over multiple visits, probably. Sometimes that will occur over a couple days as I'm, engaging with production that we've got going on, or our teams. At Stars, we have multiple teams that will sit in production lines, do daily inspections. But for me, a relationship isn't a one-off. I don't go vet a factory, run production, and move on and just do business. We're visiting our factory partners multiple times over many, many years. And so that helps to re-engage because factories that perform excellently, a couple of years later, financial issues or change in management, those things can change too. So it's a constant, vigilance, if you will, to make sure that this is business and the dollars that in many cases are being written in some of these production lines are large. So you want to be sure that the factory's doing its job and it's taking care of its employees and the results are good.
When you were talking about taking a look at the equipment and making sure it's clean, right away I was thinking, well, I bet you're also looking at just the entire factory itself to see if it's clean.
Yeah. Boy, that's an interesting one. So different countries again and different cultures in countries determine whether cleanliness equals good production. And I can tell you in certain countries, cleanliness does not equal good production.
Really?
We've had to go into some factories in preparation for customer visits because you would assume that, many other customers do. We've had to go in and clean factories up, literally, to make them look nice. They do an excellent job of production. The machinery's clean. The sewers do a good job. There's an amazingly skilled lot, but you look at the factory itself, it can look difficult and rough, and someone that doesn't have that experience could write the factory off because, look, the paint's not shiny, it's not new, and therefore the factory, probably does a sloppy mess because there are things in the factory that aren't really so neat.
Right.
And I would tell you, it's interesting country by country when you walk through. There are countries that believe in that pretty wholeheartedly, and you'll see a lot of great, shiny, clean factories with beautiful, floors and everything else. And you'll see some in some countries that I can look like Mad Max in the Thunderdome.
How do they keep their garments clean?
The production centers and the tables in which they're doing and adding trims and things usually are clean,
Okay.
The care in which they take on the garments is clean. It's just what they perceive as important for the aesthetics of the facility. And many cases, our Western eyes would be shocked by the aesthetics. We think the aesthetics should carry through.
That is absolutely fascinating. Okay, so beyond cleanliness, what are maybe some other factors that you're looking at, maybe some typical problem areas?
Yeah. In my career, I have seen all sorts of things. And red flags for me, I remember a number of times I would walk into and there would be a certain factory that's looking to do business with us. And, I would take 8 hours on a train, go to the middle of nowhere, walk into the factory, and it's completely empty.
What?
Yeah,
How is
it's
that
happened.
possible?
Well, they just don't have any business. Okay. Sometimes that, in some countries, again, there can be, holidays or whatever that would slow business down. But a warning sign is that if you're walking into a factory initially and it's empty, maybe a couple sewers walking around, the person that's showing you around the factory doesn't know where the cutting room is or where the planning room is. Those are clear-cut warning signs that that's a problem. I think there are more subtle things. There are some really experienced factory professionals that will tell you as they walk, they will tell you a good run factory by sound instead of sight.
Really?
So they always talk about the speed at which the machines are going that creates a certain sound and it's a constant hum versus a chug, chug, chug.
Right.
And they know almost immediately that the productivity of a factory is higher or lower based upon sound alone.
Gosh.
So there are these kind of very glaring issues and there are really subtle issues. I think we explore a number of things as we look through. Warning signs if they're not going to share their employee logs, their IDs for the factory, that can be an issue. Underage workers are a big issue in different places, so understanding and being able to have visibility into that is critical. I think I've walked through factories with a lot of exposed, damaged parts, and you kind of see accidents waiting to happen,
dangerous.
All over. I've seen factories when I walked into with doors locked. And you're like, well, this looks more like a prison than it does a factory.
Oh, yeah.
So, there are a number of things that are important to understand at factory levels and to walk through. Understanding that, where they're storing fabric as it comes in. Are the fabric rolls, stored and wrapped in plastic? Are they off the floor? Is the humidity of a particular factory, and certain factories and countries are pretty tropical.
Right.
And so, if they're not managing humidity levels at different things, you can sew a great garment. It can be wet or moist. That goes into a poly bag.
Oh, yeah.
Many times desiccants, which are these little things that are drying agents, should go in. But I've had situations that great factories pass inspections overseas. They get into a hot container. They sit in a hot container in a damp environment for 40 days. They show up on this side of the world and
they're completely
mold.
different. Yeah.
So there's just so many different factors in looking at a factory and understanding key warning signs on things to control.
Okay, speaking of key warning signs, what are some key warning signs that you're in production? You've got a program underway, and you're maybe getting the feeling that it's not the right factory partner.
They don't call you back
Okay.
when you ask where my production is. That's probably the biggest key warning sign. You go to the factory site and the factory's not there. I've heard stories of that too. I think there are key warning signs of stuff that go into production, and it's happened in the industry. When we produce large volumes of garments, the fabrics themselves all don't get dyed exactly at the same time. There are different size tanks, 1,000 kg Sklavos tanks and different dyeing tanks. So they can only fit so much fabric into them. And so you're going to have to dye multiple lots of fabric to achieve a full production. A really good factory separates those lots, sets the cutting tables, and marks those lots so your sleeve, your body, all those things have the same lot and the same color, because there are shading between lots.
Sure.
It's just indicative. So, one of the bigger issues that I've seen is that a factory won't properly mark and bundle. We call a bundle all the components of particular garments that go into the sewing line. The sewers, in a lot of cases, don't make those determinations about the shade lots all the time. Their job is they get a bundle, it goes down the line, it gets sewn and thrown out the other end. If the cutting room, the cutting employees, and the bundling and marking employees don't do their job, you start to see great sewn garments with bodies and sleeves that change color. So those are some of those things that we're in production. If you see stitching where there are large puncture holes in the garment every time a sewing needle goes through, they haven't shifted out the sewing needles and they're not sharp. So, there's just a number of these things that as you're looking down the line and taking a look at production, you can quickly see that. And that's why I believe that it's really important to get top of production samples, especially on large runs. So on large runs, it could take the factory, 15 days, 30 days to go through an entire production. The first 1% of production, you can get what's called a top sample, top of production, and you can take a look at those details. And that should typically be done with a representative at the factory right as soon as production's starting to go off. They can examine those and see if there's any issues. Sewers having a bad day, wavy sewing lines, dull needles, mismatched body parts, etc., and stop the line and address those before so much damage is done. So there are certainly steps to make sure that those are under control also.
Being proactive is
For sure.
tremendously important. It's so interesting when you're talking about those various problems. Like I can completely understand because I've seen garments
Sure,
with
I think
mismatched
everyone
arms
has.
and
Yeah.
the puncture holes and loose threads and so forth.
The bad one when they have 3 arms or 3 legs, that's probably not a factory you want to go back to. But, yeah.
It's really rough. Well, thank you so much for that insight. Are there any other parcels of information that you think should be shared in this conversation today?
I could go on forever on factories. I mean, there's just so many complexities and issues. I think we'll reserve, looking in how do you determine good quality fabric for, other days. But I think we've kind of touched the surface on factory production. Just importantly, be aware, be involved, and have good partners to make sure that you've vetted production properly. You understand who's making your garments. I can tell you a number of times people think certain factories are making their garments and they're not. And it is a big world.
Absolutely. Well, future conversations, we're going to be exploring how to speed up turn. It's one that is almost an everyday conversation. And we're also going to go down the marketing and the apparel industry side of things.
And I'm going to interview you.
Oh, no.
That'll be a good turnabout.
Well, if you have any thoughts or questions, please reach out on our socials at Clothing Coulture or at Stars Design Group. You can also reach us on our website at www.starsdesigngroup.com.